So that is the welcome for the new government in Pakistan. And then in the case of Yemen, where I will be leaving this evening on a delegation going there, you have a similar situation where the people in Pakistan who mostly do not support by any means the extremist groups like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, are also speaking out against the drones and saying these are a recruiting tool for extremists, these are killing lots of innocent people. And another thing that the president said was that the U.S. government uses capture instead of kill, and the Yemenis will give you numerous examples where that is just not the case.
And so those two countries are, they have the highest number of drone attacks by far. About 80% of the drone strikes have been in Pakistan or Yemen.
That's not counting Afghanistan.
That's not counting Afghanistan.
Which is actually the highest, and it's interesting to note, Colin, that the number of drone strikes in Afghanistan has risen significantly, 70% between 2011 and 2012. And it seems that with the drawdown of troops that hasn't happened yet, the U.S. military is increasing the number of drone strikes.
And what I should have prefaced by what non-U.S. battlefield, because they consider most of those strikes in Afghanistan to be battlefield strikes, and the numbers are very high for those strikes. The numbers of people who have been killed is estimated, and in those strikes that I'm talking about, 3,500 people. But the number of civilians is impossible to determine. And so on the effect that these attacks have on the community, I just want to read something from the book, very, very brief. This is in the tribal areas of Pakistan, which border Afghanistan. There are some 800,000 people living in Waziristan, and many of them live in a state of constant fear. Whether they are working on their farms, performing their chores, going to the market, driving their cars, or just sitting at home, they are always worried a drone might strike. Their inability to protect themselves and their loved ones compounds the stress. So does their inability to hold anyone accountable. So I think it's important to note that not only are the families that are affected by the strikes themselves affected, right? But also the communities as a whole. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, that's a very important issue that I saw when I traveled to places where the drones are being used, including in Gaza, where the Israelis have been using drones for quite some time. But it was also the focus of a study by the NYU and Stanford universities, and I added this into this most recent edition of the book because it is so important to recognize that it's not just the people who are killed and injured, it's also what it does to the community. And these drones, because of the type of technology, and for anybody who just doesn't understand, and listeners out there on C-SPAN, I mean, this is kind of surreal technology where you're sitting in a base in the United States, like outside of Las Vegas or in upstate New York or in New Mexico, in an air-conditioned room, in an ergonomic chair, looking at a screen, and then occasionally pressing a kill button that is killing people thousands of miles away where you might never have even been there, certainly don't have to know the culture, the people, the language, the customs. And this kind of remote control killing is something that's very new to modern warfare. And I think part of the technology is that it can hover. It stays in a village. So unlike a jet fighter that just zooms in, drops the bomb, and leaves, these pilotless drones, we're not really pilotless because the pilot is on the ground, they stay in the community, they can fly low, and when they fly low, the community hears the buzzing on a constant basis. And people tell me it's like having a bee inside your head, that you keep hearing that buzzing and you think that drone is out to get you because you never know when it's going to launch a missile, who it's going to hit, if it's after you for some reason you have no idea about, or if it's after a person who's going to be next to you in the marketplace. You're afraid to send your kids to school because schools have been hit. You're afraid to go to community gatherings weddings, funerals have been hit, and community meetings, the traditional ways the community comes together to solve problems called jirgas. Jirgas have been hit. And so it really destroys the fabric of a community. In addition, there's the issue of who is giving the information about who should be targeted. And so people start distrusting their neighbor. And it could be because you're a political rival of somebody, and so you say this person is Al-Qaeda or Taliban. It could be that you have a decades-old, if not hundreds-old, dispute with that family, and so you say that person is Al-Qaeda. And so what it has done is really destroy the community networks. And that's why people in these areas say that this is a form of collective punishment. And they say, in your war on terror, you are terrorizing our communities.
So I want to talk a little bit about the role of the U.S. Or the pilot involved here. So not only are they sitting in these ergonomic chairs and outside Las Vegas or upstate New York or wherever they may be, but they're pushing this kill button. They're seeing the effects. So you can see very clearly where the missile that you've launched hits and the after effects of it. It is a completely different experience than a fighter pilot or a bomber might experience. I want to talk a little bit about, you suggest in the book that this kind of warfare will make it more likely and easier for the United States to have wars in the future. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, because certainly before the drone capabilities existed, this country had a pretty regular record of getting into wars. It didn't seem to be that or concerned about it over the last 30 years. So what makes you think that this is going to change that and make it even more likely for the government to go into wars, considering that we've had 2 in the last 12 years?
Well, first let me just make a comment about the pilots, because I do dedicate a chapter of the book to them, and it is very hard for some of those pilots to divide their life between their daytime job, which might include killing somebody, and their evening going home to their family and being good fathers and husbands and members of the community. That's hard for a lot of them, and you see quite a significant level of PTSD among not only the drone pilots, but the people whose job is to analyze the information collected by the drones. I was just at a gathering where there was an analyst, a young woman who spoke out, and you could tell from talking to her she has PTSD. And she said how hard it was to be watching the screen and seeing what is in the inside vernacular called bug splat, because on the screen it just looks like a bug that's been squished. And knowing that these are real lives, real human beings that have just been exterminated. And then you ask about the issue of, does it make it easier to go to war? I would say it makes it easier to get involved in conflicts. You just have to look at the last couple of years. There is this tendency that we started this conversation talking about, of the American people to be war weary. You look back in decades and there was the Vietnam syndrome that lasted for quite a while, but there's also now the Iraq syndrome and the Afghanistan syndrome, and the fact that American people want to see the money being spent to rebuild our infrastructure in this country, to have a decent healthcare system, education system, maybe transform us into a green economy so we don't destroy the entire planet. And for that, we need money. So with the war weariness, I think there are people elected to office in this country who understand that we can't get involved in the way we have in Afghanistan and Iraq. We don't have the capability, we don't have the money to do that. And so the drones give us the ability to get involved without that level of cost, or at least seemingly without that level of cost. So you take an example of Libya. Whether or not you thought it was a good thing for the U.S. to get involved in the Libyan conflict, if you look at how it was done, it's extremely disturbing. And that is the administration went into the conflict in Libya without letting Congress discuss it. And that is because with the drones, the administration said, well, there's no American lives at risk. And if there's no American lives at risk, this is not a war, and so Congress doesn't really have a say about this. And so set a precedent for the next administration to get us involved in conflicts without going to Congress. I think it is dangerously seductive, as former officials of the Obama administration has said, because it seems so effortless without U.S. lives at risk. And so you see us getting involved in Yemen, in Somalia, drone bases being now peppered around the Middle East and Africa as well as the Pacific Rim. And why are drone bases being set up? Because there must be plans to use drones in the future in other scenarios as well. So I think it's something that we should be concerned about, the proliferation of drones. And then I assume we'll get in our discussion about proliferation that goes beyond the United States, and that is something that should concern all of us.
Certainly. Talk a little bit about the cost. It is, as you say, it's seen as a low-cost option, but there's significant sunk cost and then continuing cost. You want to talk about that?
Well, there's a lot of ways to look at this issue of cost. One is to say, all right, an F-15 costs $130 million, but a drone only costs, let's say the Reaper with all the bells and whistles might cost $30 million, so a significant saving. Well, except that the Reaper spends a lot more time in the air and costs somewhere between $2,000 and $3,500 per hour in the air. Counterintuitively, because you'd think, well, you're saving on not having that pilot. You actually need a lot more people to be maintaining the drones. It seems like they need 1 hour of maintenance for every hour in the air. A lot more people to be doing the analysis of the intelligence, the endless data, because the drone is recording constantly. Every minute that it's up in the air, it's sending back images. Well, there's the other issue about violating other countries' sovereignty, and it is much harder to send in troops surreptitiously. It's really not going to last for very long because local people will find out. And sending in a manned aircraft, we have the past history of them being shot down and pilots being captured. So the drones are a way to violate country sovereignty, and in some cases without the local people knowing about it. In the cases of Pakistan and Yemen, the only reason the local people found out about it was thanks to Bradley Manning and WikiLeaks, because when those cables were released, they showed correspondence between the leadership in Pakistan and in Yemen that said, okay, you use those drones and we'll pretend that it's our military doing them. And when that information came out to the public in those countries, it caused quite an outcry. In fact, it's one of the reasons for the Arab Spring in Yemen that overthrew the dictatorship, because people were so upset that they had that kind of deal with the United States behind the backs of the people. So that is one way in which this technology, I think, does make it easier to get involved in other conflicts, because it can be done in a covert way, again, covert in terms of the American people don't know, and covert in terms of the local people don't know either.
So speaking of Yemen, this is where Anwar al-Awlaki was killed, an American Muslim cleric who was targeted, as opposed to being someplace where there was suspected activity. And this caused consternation in the United States, caused consternation in Congress. And so there's a legal issue there with an American being targeted. But is there too much emphasis placed on the fact that this was an American citizen? So the implication being, well, it's okay to kill other citizens of other countries, but not to target your own. Talk a little bit about that, please.
Well, if any of you recall the 13-hour filibuster that Senator Rand Paul did at the time of the confirmation hearings for John Brennan to be the new head of the CIA, he really focused on this issue of can you use drones to kill Americans here in the United States? And during those 13 hours, he did educate the public a lot about how the drones are being used overseas, but his focus was on American citizens, and particularly here in the United States. I think our concern should be about innocent people who are being killed anywhere around the world, and then in terms of not just innocent people, people who are being killed instead of being captured, because we should be capturing people. We should be giving them a fair trial, because the fact that we suspect them of being terrorists does not mean that they are terrorists. And I was very concerned going back to the president's speech about him saying that the policy of his administration has been to capture and not kill, because that's just not true. Unlike the almost 1,000 people who were captured and put into Guantanamo during the Bush years, there's only been one person added to Guantanamo during the Obama years. The alternative has been to kill them instead of capture them. So it is unfortunate, I think, that the Obama administration has not been capturing people. And then you bring up the case of Anwar al-Awlaki. His father has been on U.S. television, not on mainstream television, but on some very fantastic TV and radio like Democracy Now! That Amy Goodman hosts. And you heard him say that his son could easily have been captured and brought to trial. There were never any charges against him. He was just put on a kill list. And even more tragic is the fact that a 16-year-old American, his son, was killed in a separate drone strike with a bunch of teenagers from Yemen. And we should really be outraged that our government kills a bunch of teenagers. And until there started to be pressure put on the U.S. to say, well, what happened in that drone strike? All they did is say there were a bunch of militants. And in fact, they said that Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, the 16-year-old American, was a 21-year-old militant until the grandfather showed up with his birth certificate to prove that he was indeed 16 years old and that he was born in Denver. So I think it is important to look at U.S. citizens, because many of us are U.S. citizens. And if, as has been determined by the Obama administration, we don't have something that most of us thought we did have, which is the right to a judicial process, that is extremely disturbing. You know, we're coming up on the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta, where people throughout history have been fighting for the right to appear before a judge, to have the right to a trial. And one would have thought in an advanced democracy like the United States, this would just be a given. But to have Eric Holder, the Attorney General, tell a group of Northwestern students here in Illinois that American citizens do not have the right to a judicial process should have been something that just kind of woke up the entire legal community and the rest of us who really would like to make sure that we do have the right to a fair trial. And so I think while we are at a point right now where there's a lot more scrutiny of the policies of the Obama administration in terms of surveillance of the American people, in terms of going after journalists, and in terms of things like going after poor Bradley Manning, a young man who now faces his entire life in prison, it is a good idea to maybe try to push our government to go back to the basics of the rule of law, capture, and fair trials.
So I think that's a good spot to talk about. So what are the, kind of looking out at the potential threats to Americans, from the drone industry and the use of drones? What do we see out there that is a potential danger?
Well, there's two things happening. One is the proliferation of drones around the world, because this is not nuclear technology. This is much simpler technology, and it's being sold by the United States, by Israel, by China. Even South Africa is now in the business of selling drones, including armed drones. And so we should be concerned about how other countries are going to use these. If we have given out a model to the rest of the world that says we can go anywhere we want, kill anyone we want on the basis of secret information, what are other countries going to do in the future? And the other concern we should have is drones being used right here at home. There is an extremely strong lobby of the drone industry, and that is because it's now a multi-billion-dollar industry. They see the war in Iraq wound down, potentially the war in Afghanistan winding down. They're looking for other outlets for selling the drones, both surveillance drones, commercial drones, and there are many potential and perhaps positive commercial uses for drones. Drones used by governments for putting out forest fires, drones used to track endangered species, lots of positive potential uses of drones. But there's also potential real dangers of uses of drones here in the United States. And while the U.S. government doesn't seem too concerned about drones crashing in the Seychelles or in the mountains of Afghanistan, the Federal Aviation Administration, which is in charge of our airspace, is concerned about drones crashing over people's homes here in the United States. And so they've been very reluctant to give out lots of permits for the use of drones. Well, the lobby, with their friends in Congress who formed a drone caucus to push for the proliferation of these drones. And by the way, these Congress people in the drone caucus happen to get a lot of money from the drone industry. They have passed legislation that says by September of 2015, our airspace must be opened up to drones. So there is a scramble on now to see how to do that. And who are the potential users of drones, not only the commercial ones and others I mentioned, but it's police forces in the United States. And there are about 18,000 police forces in the United States. The drone industry would love to sell to every one of those. And we should be very concerned now that we know that the phone companies have given out our data to the government. We know that Google and Facebook have given our data to the U.S. government. The next step would be 24/7 surveillance by drones. And on that note, what is very exciting, I think, is because this legislation the opening of the airspace hasn't gone into effect yet. It's September 2015. There are communities and states that are fighting back against this preemptively. And it's very exciting to see coalitions, left, right, civil libertarians coming together in 5 states. That's Florida, Idaho, Montana, Virginia, Tennessee. Not particularly blue states. They have all passed legislation against the law enforcement agencies using drones without a court order. And there are dozens of other states, including right here in Illinois, that are in the process of doing this.
So I think on that note, we'll end it. I do want to say that I think one key point of this is that Medea is not arguing for putting the genie back in the bottle on drones, but for a debate about their use.
Well, for real regulation that would stop the use of killer drones and would regulate the use of drones at home to respect our privacy and our safety.
So thanks everybody for coming. Medea, thank you very much. Nice seeing you again.
Thank you. Drones. And anybody who wants to get involved, codepink.org is our website, and droneswatch.org is another one.
Enjoy the fest.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming out this afternoon. I also want to take a moment to thank Colin and Medea. If you guys give them one last round of applause, that'd be great. The conversation was very interesting, and unfortunately we didn't have time for questions and answers, but Medea will be signing copies of her book here in the Arts Room, so if you do have questions for her, please stop on by, visit her. She'll sign a copy of her book and answer any questions you guys may have. Thank you very much for coming out today. Chicago Printers Row Lit Fest thanks you and hopes you guys have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That flew by.
I know, it's incredible.
That's great.
We'll be right back with more from Chicago.
What are you reading this summer?